Hokie Hangover live on YouTube Sunday night here, 9:15 p.m. Coming to you a little bit earlier this week because we got a Thursday night game coming out of the bye week against Boston College. We are live on YouTube, youtube.com/@Hokie Hangover Podcast. If you have not subscribed yet, please go do that. It is a big help to Ricky, Andrew, and myself when you go and hit subscribe. Just Ricky and I tonight. Andrew is at game one of the NLCS. So,
which
when
is
the
not
Mets,
going well for Andrew right now.
it's not going particularly well for the Mets at time of recording. But the one thing I will say is when your team makes it that far in the playoffs and you have an opportunity to go, you go. He texted us on Saturday morning and he said, I just made an impulsive decision. And he said, I will not be on the preview podcast. And I said, fair enough. And he sent us his flight itinerary, leaving from Charlotte, flying out to LA. So good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah. Hopefully the Mets magic will show up again. My fiance is from Long Island and she's a Mets fan. So here for the Mets getting it done.
Yeah. Yep. And we don't need to see the Dodgers doing any more of that winning stuff. It's been nice not having them make it this far in the playoffs last few seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about the BC game. We're going to preview it here in a bit. But Ricky and I, at the start of this podcast, we wanted to kind of take stock in the ACC championship race. We're basically at the halfway point. It's a little weird, like this year in particular, because a lot of teams have 2 bye weeks. But for the most part, most ACC teams have played at least 6 games to this point through the games that took place yesterday. So we're basically at the halfway point of the year. And the conference title race, as far as like who can actually make it to Charlotte, is still kind of wide open. Yeah. There are a number of teams who can make it. I think there are only a couple of true maybe 3 to 4 like teams that I think like really have a shot, and then there's really only a couple teams that I think can actually win the thing, but we'll get into all that. But I think we wanted to start with just going over some of the results from yesterday quickly. There were only 6 games total in the ACC this weekend. They were all on Saturday. We had no weeknight action. Again, a lot of teams on bye. In some cases, a second bye, right? Mm-hmm. But going down the list, let's get one out of the way really quickly. Stanford lost by 1 million to Notre Dame, and that was kind of expected.
Yeah, but this was the one that I think stood out to me the most.
Okay, fire away.
Yeah, it just from the sense of, remember 4 weeks ago, we thought Stanford was actually a decent team. And in the last 2 weeks, they've been blown out by a team that's 500 and a team that has had their own kind of up and downs on offense, especially. So that Stanford win, while nice to have in your back pocket, doesn't feel like it weighs all that much right now, considering how bad they've looked.
Yeah. Ashton Daniels' return for Stanford, it did not really matter. When we previewed this game, when we did our ACC picks last week, we thought that Lamson was going to play. That's kind of what the tea leaves were saying. Ironically, Lamson scored their only touchdown in this game. He had a short touchdown run by the goal line. But Ashton Daniels started the game and played, for all intents and purposes, like all the snaps. Yeah, Stanford's bad. They're better than they were last year, which is not a very high bar to clear, but they're still not very good. Notre Dame really kind of went with the Virginia Tech game plan, which is what I thought they would do, because Notre Dame is just basically a better version of Virginia Tech in terms of like stylistically how they want to play. They run their quarterback a lot. They really focus on running the ball like 65% of the time. They have an elite defense, and they just kind of kept plugging away here, and Stanford had no answer. Stanford scored early in this game, actually took a 7-0 lead, and then Notre Dame scored 49 straight points. So that's how that went for Stanford. There was a storm delay in the fourth quarter because there were some nasty storms in the Midwest yesterday. And ironically, the game between the Guardians and Tigers got moved up like 6 hours because they were worried about storms in the Cleveland area. So this game was over for a really long time, but then it got delayed, and it would end up being like a 5 or 6 hour affair. But anyway, Notre Dame won by a lot. The most interesting result to me of the weekend, just in terms of this one team in particular that I'm kind of surprised is 6-0, Pittsburgh beat Cal 17-15, and it's not that Pittsburgh won the game, but it's that they're 6-0 for the first time in 42 years. So when Pat Narduzzi made the Cade Bell hire from Western Carolina, he was a Western Carolina offensive coordinator, really highly thought of in the FCS. When he made that hire, I don't think he could have dreamed of it going this well through 6 games. Now, I know Pittsburgh only put up 17 points on Saturday, and that's a pretty good Cal defense, right? But Pittsburgh's offense is a big reason why they're 6-0, and they made the plays they needed to when it mattered on Saturday. And Ricky, this is one of those teams that, look, has a tough-ish schedule down the stretch, but I think with how they've played this year, that they're playing pretty good defense. It's improving week over week. And Eli Holstein is a freshman at quarterback, but he seems to have a pretty good command of what Cade Bell wants him to do offensively, and they just seem like they're plugging along. This is a good Pitt team this year. They're good.
They haven't beaten anybody. This is my thing with Pitt. No one that they've played thus far really is a team that you could consider like a top 40 team, I think.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
That's going to change, like you mentioned, in the second half of the year. They've got SMU, Clemson, a team in Virginia that, even though they lost yesterday, which, damn, you hate to see it, Virginia looks a little better. Pitt's going to have a bit of a tougher road here in the next several games, but, I mean, it's certainly better. It's impressive considering what they did last year, which was not very much. Holstein does seem like he's got a chance to be a pretty solid QB, and they have been able to take advantage of a relatively weak schedule, which, you know, plenty of teams don't. So you got to give them credit where it's due. But when the going gets a little tougher here in the second half of the season, I think you might see the Panthers fade a bit.
We'll see. We're going to learn a lot over the next 6 weeks. Ricky, like you mentioned, they're on the road. They have a home game against Syracuse after the bye. They're on the road at SMU, host Virginia and Clemson, and then travel to Louisville and Boston College to close it out. There are at least 3 losable games in there, maybe 4. So kind of depending on what you think of some of these teams. I have a feeling that Pittsburgh is probably going to, against those 4 tough opponents, they're probably going to drop at least 1, maybe 2. I could see that. This is at least an 8-win Pittsburgh team, though. And when I look at the thing that makes me really happy is actually what I wanted to get to. I was holding an over 5.5 win total ticket, and it cashed halfway through the season yesterday. So I was really excited about that. The flip side of
that's a hell of a win there, Mike.
at plus, it was like plus 142 or something. I got to go back and check the odds, like plus 142 or something. So pretty good. I got pretty good odds on it as well, and it cashed in mid-October, which you feel good about. What you don't feel so good about is when you're holding an over 8.5 win ticket for a team like NC State, who lost 24-17 to Syracuse yesterday. And man, I want to talk about NC State. NC State is not in the title hunt. They're done.
They're 0-3 in the conference already.
For all intents and purposes, they are absolutely cooked. They lost 24-17 yesterday, and the reason why I want to talk about NC State is in a subsection of teams in the ACC of programs that had a lot of expectations coming into the year, and they simply just have not delivered. And I think an impetus for that was that Grayson McCall was going to be a difference maker for them at quarterback that they really haven't had in a few years. He hasn't really been healthy, and when he has been, he hasn't played particularly well. He did not play in this game yesterday. It was C.J. Bailey, the freshman, who's probably just as good as McCall is as like a 12th year senior, which tells you everything you need to know there. They should just keep running C.J. Bailey out there, because if he amounts to anything in the next few years, if you think he's going to amount to anything in the next few years, you just got to keep running him out there, especially at this point. NC State's 3-4, like you mentioned, winless in the ACC. Syracuse, though, is now 5-1, and they're 2-1 in league play. And they have a loss to Stanford that is looking pretty bad.
Not looking good.
It's looking pretty bad. But Syracuse has a schedule, again, much like Pittsburgh, where we're going to learn a little bit more about them in the next 6 weeks. They got Pitt. They host Virginia Tech. Miami is still on there. They travel to Boston College and Cal still. and then they host UConn in a game they should win by at least 3 scores probably. So Syracuse is 5-1 and 2-1 in league play for now. And by the way, Syracuse is one of 10 teams in the ACC that have 1 loss or fewer in league play. So when we tell you it's wide open, it's really wide open. But for several of these teams, the toughest part of the schedule is what's upcoming. So Syracuse, I think, is one of those teams.
Yeah, which is kind of the opposite of Virginia Tech as we kind of look at the second half for the Hokies. But as far as NC State is concerned, do they make a bowl game? I mean, they're 3-4 at this point.
Let's look at, let's play the schedule game, shall we? Okay, at Cal on Saturday.
That's hard. That's not.
That's
easy.
hard. That's you host Stanford.
Should win that game. Should
host.
I would venture to bet that NC State will be inside of a 1-score favorite against Stanford. Like 4.5 or 5.
Yeah, this is going to be like a hold on to your butts situation because it's at Cal, home against Stanford, home against Duke, which will not be easy, at Georgia Tech, at North Carolina. And while North Carolina is bad, they continue to play teams tough.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that's a gimme.
They're for all of the talk of Mac Brown's demise, which may end up coming at the end of the year, the guys have not quit at Carolina. They took Georgia Tech to the wire on Saturday, which is another team that we'll talk about in a second. But NC State certainly seems like they're in trouble. I'm not sure they're going bowling this year. Syracuse has definitely rebounded since that Stanford loss. The win over UNLV, I feel like, was a bit of a turning point for me as it relates to the Orange, thinking that they may be not great, but about as good as I thought after the first couple games of the year, where it seemed like Stanford was turning a corner early on.
Yeah, it's gotten a little scary for the Cardinal. Okay, Clemson, I think, is Clemson won 49-14 yesterday. They are a bona fide contender. I don't necessarily want to waste a ton of time on Clemson because I think we have a pretty good idea what they are, and they're really good. This is the best team they've had in probably 4 years. They're really good. They're good.
Yeah, I think I texted you guys yesterday and was like, Phil Maffa is a confirmed dude.
He's good. Yeah,
really saw him put somebody on their ass yesterday, and I was like, yeah, those guys don't come around very often.
Clemson was just not taking. By the way, I think Maffa's better than Will Shipley. I think I can lay that to rest once and for all. I thought I had that take like last year. I was like, man, I don't know if I want to put this out there, but I think Maffa might be a better back than Shipley. And I kind of like whispered it, but I never really yelled it from the heavens. I can yell it from the heavens now. Like he's sick. Yeah, Clemson just no respect for Wake Forest. I mean, they were running like double passes up by 3 scores. I mean, yeah. Hopefully Wake Forest enjoyed that 7-0 lead they had after the first quarter, because that was.
I almost texted you guys, and I was going to be like, Clemson, what the hell are we doing? Like,
then they rattled off like 21. Then they rattled off like 21 points in like 6 minutes.
Yeah, good thing I didn't press send there, because that would have looked like a jackass.
Yeah, they got the train back on the track there quickly. Okay, these final 2 games, Georgia Tech beat Carolina 41-34 in what can amount to nothing less than a really, really bad beat for me. I had Carolina plus 5.5, and that felt like the right side pretty much the entire game. And then Georgia Tech Jamal Haynes breaks off the really long run there with like whatever it was, 2 minutes left. That's done. That's a tough one to take.
I am at a loss for how to believe or how to rate Georgia Tech at this point. I don't know if I believe in them at all. The defense seems eminently gettable. The offense seems just kind of all over the place. I respect that they've got some guys on that side of the football, but I just don't know that they are as consistent as they need to be. With that said, I am absolutely terrified of Virginia Tech having to play them in a couple weeks.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah,
that Georgia Tech is a kind of team that at 5-2 could find themselves at 8 wins this year for sure. I haven't looked at the rest of their schedule. We can essentially guarantee they're going to lose the last game of the year, but
it's not an easy
actually,
schedule.
okay, yeah, this schedule sucks. Notre Dame at Virginia Tech, which I mean they that's a 50-50 game. At home against Miami, the NC State game, they should win that game. They'll be favored.
Yeah,
And then they'll get their yearly their yearly spanking from the
yeah,
Bulldogs to finish the year. Sorry, Joey, if you're listening.
yeah, yeah. They'll try to do what they did last year. They'll sit on the ball a little bit. Georgia Tech will be getting ready for the playoff.
I
Probably.
mean, hey,
Probably.
they've got the running back to do it.
Yeah, they do. I'm going to be recording my ACC podcast after this tonight, and I have said this a bunch, and I'll say it again right now, and I'll say it again in about an hour from now. I have no idea how good Georgia Tech is. We're 7 games into the year. I don't really know what they are. I think their defense is a lot better. Well, not a lot better. I think their defense is better than it was last year. But again, not a high bar to clear. Better than it was last year.
To this Carolina offense that is a one-trick pony, essentially.
Yeah.
That's not a good sign.
They give up a lot of explosive plays still. So that's a big thing. Offensively, I mean, they got the horses. I mean, Haynes King and Jamal Haynes are both very good, but I'm not really sure. I think we'll know a lot more here in about a month. Right, lead into the last few games of the year. I think we'll have a pretty good idea of what Georgia Tech is.
Definitely.
Louisville beat Virginia 24-20. And I mean, look, Virginia had to throw the ball in this game 45 times with Anthony Calandria. And when you put the ball in the air that much, there's only a couple things that can happen. You're either going to have a lot of explosive plays or you're going to have a lot of those throws where you're like, man, what the hell was that? And he did not turn the ball over on Saturday, but there were a couple passes where I was like, man, that should have been picked. That should have been picked. That should have been picked.
There is a certain Hokie listening right now that texted me and said, boo-hoo. And I audibly laughed while walking around my house. It was quite comical. Virginia, Mike, we talked about this on the last episode. This schedule is going to get a lot tougher. They really needed this game. Mm-hmm. I still don't think Louisville's all that good, but Virginia needed this one, and them not getting it is really going to bite them in the rear here in a few weeks. They're going to have a really, really tough road to finish.
Clemson on the road, Carolina at home. Bye week at Pitt, at Notre Dame, home against SMU, at Virginia Tech, where they just don't win in Blacksburg. So, I mean, you could be scaring. I mean, this could go from 4-2 to 4-8. I'm not sure that it will because they've been competent
in a row.
And they've been competent enough. Like, could they give Carolina some trouble? Yeah. Could they give Pitt some trouble? Yeah. Could they sneak up on SMU? Yeah. Could they be a team that goes into South Bend and Notre Dame's just like not paying attention and give Notre Dame some trouble? Yeah. they could certainly do that. They're not a conference title contender, but they're better than I thought. Louisville, I don't think is a serious threat really either. I mean, they're technically still in it. They're 2-1 in the league, 4-2 overall, but they host Miami this weekend. I mean, we'll see. It's a nooner. At BC, at Clemson, at Stanford, home against Pitt, at Kentucky. I mean, the Kentucky game obviously doesn't matter for the ACC title race, but I mean, they've already lost to SMU, and we know SMU is going to be in the mix. They still got Miami and Clemson. I mean, I think you pretty much have to go 2-0 there, just given how many teams are in that like one loss or less mix. I think you have to beat both Miami and Clemson if you're Louisville to get to the ACC title game. Not to say they couldn't still get there with 2 league losses, like if they split those games and won the rest, but there are some teams that are going to have to jump. I mean for Louisville though, they kind of outside that SMU game, right? SMU owns that tiebreaker. They kind of control their own destiny. I mean, Clemson, Miami, and Pitt are all on the schedule, right? So you just got to focus on. I mean, if you're Louisville, you just got to kind of focus on you here. Like if you win the rest of your, you got 5 conference games left. If you win all 5 of them, you're going to Charlotte. You're going to own too many tiebreakers. I mean, you're going to jump everybody.
Speaking of Clemson, Virginia, Louisville, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt, the Citadel, and South Carolina.
Yeah.
Who's the toughest team on that schedule? I know the record says it's Pitt, but
athletes wise, I'm throwing the South Carolina game to the side because that's a Clemson could lose that game, but for the ACC title race, doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
That game that game could actually matter a lot more if Clemson enters the ACC title game with 2 losses, though. that's when that South Carolina game could matter, just for playoff implications. But as far as ACC teams are concerned, I think the toughest team is Louisville.
Okay.
Just athletes wise. They have more athletes in Virginia. They still have more athletes in Louisville, more athletes in Virginia Tech, more athletes in Pittsburgh.
But does Louisville... So you're telling me at home against Louisville is a tougher game than in Blacksburg the next week?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough to go to Blacksburg. You'd obviously rather play at home down the road. But as far as like the team you're playing, yeah.
Based on what I've seen, and maybe I'm homering right now, but I would say Tech would be the toughest game left on that schedule outside of Pitt. And I'm still not all that sold on Pitt. And that's not really me saying that Virginia Tech is all that good. Just that this schedule for Clemson is really not that challenging.
Yeah.
This is certainly a schedule where Clemson can run the table for sure.
Yeah. I think they probably will. Just based on what I've seen so far. They've really they've had a couple games here since the Georgia game where they've gotten off to a slowish start, but then they just kind of hit the gas and just blow by everybody. So it's just really hard for me to gauge. I mean, if Virginia Tech plays like it did against Miami, they could certainly give Clemson some trouble, I think, but I don't know. I think Clemson is better than Miami, and they've just been playing more consistent football. I mean, basically since they lost that Georgia game, they've just been beating teams by 100. I mean, they have a 46-point win over App State. They beat NC State by 24. They beat Stanford by 26. They beat Florida State by 16, and they never scored in the red zone in that game. They had 4 trips to the red zone, never scored a touchdown. They scored in the red zone, just not a touchdown. And then the Wake game yesterday, they won that game by 35. I mean, they're beating everybody by 1 million.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And again, that's not me saying that Virginia Tech is, a really good football team. It's just I don't think that schedule for Clemson is all that challenging. And looking at Miami's schedule, I don't know that their schedule is all that challenging either. I mean,
no.
Out of these games remaining, the Duke game would be the one that would have me worried the most, just because I really do believe in Duke's defense. At Louisville, I mean, this game coming up this Saturday is a big one, but then you get Florida State at home. I mean, that team's awful.
Yeah.
At Georgia Tech after the Duke game, you get Wake at home. Wake's not really challenging anybody right now. and then you finish the year at Syracuse. That could be an interesting game that has Charlotte implications. Would that be
Yeah.
them going to the Carrier Dome and having to win that game to make it to Charlotte,
It's
which
the
may
same.
be the case.
It's out there. I mean, we just talked about
Possibility.
Syracuse's schedule. It's a possibility. Weird things have happened in that Miami Duke game. I just don't see Duke. I just don't see Duke scoring enough. But weird things have happened there. Weird things have happened at Georgia Tech. Weird things have happened, obviously, against Florida State. That's a rivalry game, and Florida State still has plenty of talent on their team. So it's not a talent thing. And Louisville's got athletes. So if Miami kind of plays with their food a little bit and does what they did the last 2 weeks, it will bite them here somewhere in the next 4 games. It will.
Yeah.
They will lose. They will lose one somewhere if they don't give these teams their full attention. I think Miami and Clemson are going to Charlotte.
Certainly looks that way. Again, I'm still not all that sold on Pitt. SMU, I haven't really believed in for the entirety of the season, but they seem to have found their stride as we get closer towards the midway point. But Clemson certainly looks like they're the closest they've been to the War Machine Clemson from several years ago.
Yeah.
They've got the ability to put up points. They've got the ability to lock offenses down. Dabo's got a really good thing going there right now. Miami is Miami's a little sus. I mean, they've gotten away with these two games the last 2 weeks that, you know, maybe both of those situations were two of the toughest games that they had left on the schedule, considering, you know, Cal was playing really good football. That was a cross-country trip. You had Tech, who gave Miami one of the best performances that Miami has seen all year. So I'm not really sure what we're going to see from the Canes for the rest of the year. I also just don't know how much I believe in Cristobal. But if we're talking about the guys on the field, Clemson and Miami are the two teams that have the best shot of getting to Charlotte. After that, it is really 5 to 7 teams that are fighting over the next several spots.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can get odds on just teams to appear in Charlotte. Clemson, by the way, is the favorite on FanDuel, plus 150. Miami is plus 160 to win the league, right? So, I mean, they're pretty much neck and neck.
Yeah.
SMU, third best odds at plus 500. Pitt, plus 1,600. Louisville, plus 1,600. And Syracuse, plus 4,200 are the next handful of teams. The reason why I say I wonder if you can get odds somewhere on teams just like flat out to make it to the title game, not necessarily win. SMU would not be a bad bet there, right? Yeah. If you wanted like a dark horse. Now, I think Miami and Clemson are the two best teams in the ACC. I think they will make it to Charlotte. But if Miami slips up in any of the next 3 to 4 games, like we mentioned, coming up on their schedule, SMU might be that team to watch. They haven't lost an ACC game yet, and their schedule coming down the stretch is not super imposing. They travel to Stanford this weekend. They travel to Duke, home against Pitt, home against BC, at Virginia, home against Cal. They're going to be favored in at least 4 of the remaining 6, maybe 5. They're at least going to be favored. Not to say they can't drop one. I think they will. I think they'll probably drop a couple in there. But, you know, Stanford and Duke, they can't really score, right? And SMU can, right? So if you can put the ball in the end zone like 3 to 4 times, you're probably in good shape there. Pitt's a tough game, but you get it at home. You don't have to travel there. Then you got BC winnable at UVA. Again, UVA can probably score with you, but you have more athletes. And then home against Cal to close things out. That could be a really important game. So SMU at plus 500 to win the league. I don't see SMU winning the ACC, but I could see them making it to the title game potentially, especially if Miami kind of does after their bye week what they were doing the last couple weeks. So just something to monitor. I think that schedule sets up pretty nicely for SMU to go on a little bit of a run here, even though there are some trip up games potentially. There are a lot tougher schedules for several teams than the one SMU has to face the next 6 weeks.
It would be very fitting for a team like SMU that's in a different time zone in their first year in the conference to make the conference championship game. That would be right on brand for this thing we call a conference.
Yeah, they've only really gone out west twice. The first time was in the opener against Nevada, and then you travel to Stanford this weekend. But other than that, you had BYU at home. That's SMU's only loss, and man, is that aging well. You lost that game by a field goal. BYU is capital G good, like probably going to win the Big 12 good, or at least be in the title game. And yeah, I mean, outside of that, you host Cal. You have to travel to Duke, so I guess you're going to, and you have to travel to UVA. So I mean, you're kind of in the middle of the country. So, but you don't have to go like way out west twice. Twice in the ACC, only once playing Stanford on the road this weekend. So, yeah, SMU's got a little bit of a. They're a team to monitor in the title race. I said before the season started, Miami was my pick to win the ACC over Clemson. I think I want to probably flip that at this point based on what I've seen. Clemson hasn't really screwed around with inferior opponents at all. And
nope. Georgia was a bit of a wake-up call for them.
Yeah, and like if they play that game again, like Clemson was in that game for a half, and you play that game again, I think Clemson's offense is in a lot better shape now than it was in the opener. I know Georgia's got a really good defense, but I don't think that game is like 34-3 again, especially with how that first half went. That kind of snowballed on Clemson a little bit in the second half. So I think Georgia's a better team. I think Georgia's one of like the 3 or 4 best teams in the country probably. And Clemson's probably in that next class of like 5 to 12, somewhere in there. And probably closer to 5 than 12 looking at Clemson. But I don't think they're like elite, like true national title contender. But this is the closest thing to a title contender that Dabo's had in a while. So he kind of bet on his development, and he's got a lot of really good players that have played good football this year. So he's been kind of trusting his recruiting and evaluation development. And everybody was laughing him out of the building, and I think the transfer portal stuff is still justified, but he's kind of trusted his ability to evaluate and develop, and for the first time in a few years, it looks like it's paying off. So that's where we're at. Anything else there before we talk BC?
No, let's talk about the Eagles.
Let's do it. Boston College is 4-2. They're 1-1 in the ACC. They are coming off of a bye week. They lost a week ago to UVA 24-14. And they beat Western Kentucky 2 weeks ago in a squeaker with their backup quarterback. Castellanos returned for the Virginia game. He's been pretty good this year, but he did not play his best game against UVA. Had a couple interceptions that were pretty ugly. As a whole, Boston College really struggled to run the ball against Virginia, which was a little bit of a surprise. And this is a Boston College offense as a whole that has Castellanos, and he's good, but the running game has been a bit of a mess, and the defense has been up and down. But this is probably going to be Bill O'Brien's worst team in Chestnut Hill, and I think they're probably going to a bowl game. So even kind of with a tough closing stretch, I think they'll probably win 2 of their remaining games. If they beat Virginia Tech, I think they're definitely going to a bowl game. So I think this is a team to obviously take seriously coming in here Thursday night.
Yeah, it seems like Bill O'Brien has changed the prevailing thought about this program and their ability to play above their competition and to kind of exceed expectations. Jeff Hafley never got this thing really going, and Bill O'Brien's unique experience both in the NFL and in college, I think, makes him a very interesting guy to bring into this program. in a lot of ways the same as Jeff Halfley, but better in the sense of to attract guys to this program, to a team like or program like Boston College. You really have to have some serious chops when it comes to football development and experience at the next level. Otherwise, guys aren't really itching to go play there. And I think Bill O'Brien is certainly going to bring that. And he's, I think, maximized in a lot of ways the talent that he's got on this roster. Getting Trayshawn Ward in was huge. A guy that's bounced around college football at this point, but he's been a very productive running back thus far, and what's kind of been a three-headed operation for the Eagles. Mike, I see you're laughing at Joey's comment about Bill O'Brien. If you want to go ahead and throw that up from the Facebook one. Joey, that's a you thing, man. You got to figure that out. But Thomas Castellanos, which, Mike, I know is your favorite player in the conference and probably the entire country, it really got off to a hot start.
Certainly one way to put it.
He got off to a hot start this year, but you're right. He has not looked like quite the same player. And I wonder if maybe teams are really starting to figure this thing out. And if you look at who Boston College has beaten up to this point, they don't really have a really impressive win. Their most impressive performance is probably the one-score loss to Missouri, which Missouri's prestige has taken a bit of a hit considering what happened a couple weeks ago.
Mid-zoo. Shout out Tom Fornelli, cover 3, mid-zoo.
So, I mean, the Florida State game, I think that gave us a bit of a false paradigm to kind of view Boston College within, because BC won that game, and I think at the time it was fair to think that, Florida State got off to a bad start, in week 0 against Georgia Tech, and they're still a good team.
Yeah.
But BC winning that game certainly does not carry as much weight now as it did when it happened. Michigan State, they're 3-3. I know that roster is not very good, but they're certainly at least a competent football team, but not a good one.
They look better than I think a lot of people thought they would.
Yeah, Western Kentucky, same deal. Not really all that impressed. And then the one time they've played a team that's kind of been on the up and up this year, UVA, they lost by 2 scores. So I'm not really sure what to make of BC. I know that Castellanos is going to cause problems. He's the exact kind of quarterback that can give Virginia Tech those issues. Dare I say a little Diego Pavia-like. I don't know that he's as good as Diego Pavia, but he's certainly got that kind of gamer mentality of improvising and making plays out of thin air. The running game for BC has been a little up and down, but they've got enough horses back there that I do worry about whether or not Virginia Tech's run defense can continue to hold up. This is a unit that's struggled for most of Brent Pry's tenure here. They've been better this year, and it's important to note that. But can they hold up against what I think is a pretty well-coached team and a really good group of running backs along with a mobile quarterback? The BC passing game doesn't really worry me all that much, but from an offensive perspective, Virginia Tech is really going to have to slow down the run game here and force Castellanos into some of those more obvious passing situations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a game where I think if Virginia Tech stops the run here, Castellanos, I don't think provides enough in the passing game against Virginia Tech secondary that has been good this year. I mean, they've been the secondary has been really good.
Secondary Castellanos has faced up to this point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I don't know if this is the best pass rush that Castellanos has faced, but there's potential there too that this is also the best pass rush he's faced. So, I mean, I look at this for Boston College, and I think the way that this gets uglied up a little bit is if BC's defense plays a good game, which they're certainly capable of doing. Boston College's defense has been fine this year. Donovan Ezeraku, defensive end, really good player. He's their leading monster, like leading tackler, all ACC caliber defensive end.
This year, Mike, nobody else on the team has more than one. I mean, he's been kind of a one-man wrecking crew this year for them.
Yeah, I mean, just line him up on Parker Clement's side of the field and let him cook, I think would be the game plan if I was Bill O'Brien. He's really good. He's really, really good. He is their pass rush, as you mentioned. You kind of took the words out of my mouth with his sack numbers. Yes, he's got 9 of them. Nobody else has more than one. That tells you everything you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
He basically single-handedly won the game for them against Western Kentucky with an incredible defensive play to set BC up offensively deep in Western Kentucky territory, which is something they needed. They needed to steal a possession in a game where they were playing their backup quarterback and the offense was really having trouble moving it. So basically single-handedly won them that game. Yeah, BC has a good defense. I mean, I think the path here for Boston College would be obviously to stop the run, which they've done to varying degrees all year. Virginia can't really run the ball,
Nope.
right? And I look at that game, and really it was what Calandria was able to do, right? Kobe Pace had 19 carries for 83 yards. That was great, but Calandria came up with a couple of really big plays. His touchdown pass obviously was pretty impactful in that game. For those of you that watched it, this is a BC team that I think can cause some issues with Virginia Tech's running game potentially. I think if that is the case, then it's going to be on Kyron Drones' shoulders. And I think the game plan for a lot of teams is really to make Kyron Drones throw and make Virginia Tech's receivers beat you. Because I think a lot of Virginia Tech fans are really high on Virginia Tech's receiving core, and I think Virginia Tech has good receivers. But I don't think there's anybody in Virginia Tech's receiving core that opposing defenses are like, oh my God, how, like, you know what I mean? Like BC faced Luther Burden earlier this year at Mizzou. Like, that's like an, oh my God, we have to play Luther Burden this week. Virginia Tech doesn't have any of those guys. And I love Jalen Lane, think he's a great player. Stephen Gosnell has been really good this year. I like Virginia Tech's receivers a lot. I like Felton. It's a shame Allie Jennings hasn't been healthy. I like Virginia Tech's receivers, but there's nobody in the receiving core that Boston College is looking at, and it's going to be like, oh my God, if we stop the run, we're still going to get cooked by this guy in the passing game. I don't think they're going to look at it that way defensively. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know.
No, I don't think you're wrong. Virginia Tech doesn't have the kind of receiver that you can force feed.
It's not game breaker.
Which you can do with Luther Burden.
Right.
Jalen Lane is, I think, Virginia Tech's best receiver, but
for sure,
he's not the kind of guy that can take over on his own. And I don't mean that as a knock on him. That's just not who he is.
Right.
But Virginia Tech does have the ability to get open in man coverage. And I'm not, based on what I've read, I don't think that BC's defensive backs are anything to write home about. And if that's the case, where Kyron is put in a position where he has to put the ball in the air a little bit more than normal, I think Virginia Tech can win those matchups.
Right.
I will say that I don't think Virginia Tech should let Boston College dictate what their offensive identity is going to be. Virginia Tech needs to run the football consistently, regardless of what the defense is doing. They cannot let opposing defenses bait them into abandoning the best part of their offense.
Agree.
I know that running against 8-man boxes is not easy, but Virginia Tech's offensive line has been relatively good in the run game. You've got one of the best running backs in the conference. Go ahead and take advantage of that and use that to your advantage. Don't let BC load up the box and then force you to have to throw 2 out of 3 times on every possession. That's not how Virginia Tech's going to move the ball against anybody, let alone a team like BC that has a defense that's fine, but nothing great.
Stanford loaded the box against Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech just kept running it, and it worked out fine. Virginia Tech's offensive line is coming off of 2 of their best games of the year, and I think you got to ride that momentum coming out of a bye week and just commit to the run, like you said. I said that Boston College could stop Virginia Tech's running game. I didn't say they would. I think that this is a game where Virginia Tech, like you mentioned, just continues to plug away in the running game like they did against Stanford. I think they'll be okay. Running against 8-man boxes is not easy unless you're Ashton Jeanty. In that case, you can run against any box. It doesn't really matter. But for as good as Bashal Tootin is, he's not Ashton Jeanty, but he's pretty damn good. He's one of the best running backs in the conference. I think you just continue to give him the ball and good things happen. Plus, he's going to be fresh coming off the bye week, which I think
And
is really important.
and you know what? Find ways to get him the ball creatively. It doesn't all have to be the traditional handoff. You can get him the ball in the screen game. You can try and work him on some sweeps along the perimeter. You can find different ways to get your playmakers the football without having to do it the traditional way. So
Right.
for a guy like Jalen Lane, he's someone that you want to get the football in his hands. It does not have to necessarily be in the traditional passing game. So I want Virginia Tech to continue to be creative on offense and find ways to get their guys the football. The Miami game was a great example of this, where we hadn't seen it really all year, but Virginia Tech ran those essentially option pitches to Bashal
Right.
Tootin to the perimeter like 15 times, and
Yeah.
they worked most of the time. And that's not necessarily a traditional run play, but you have to find ways to get your guys the ball in space. Bashal Tootin is one of those people that they need to get the ball to. And I don't care what kind of box that BC throws up in this game, you've got to get your best player the football.
This game is very similar to Stanford in that Virginia Tech's going up against a good rushing defense. Boston College is ranked 25th in the country in rushing defense. Stanford was ranked pretty high too. They were a top 30 unit when Virginia Tech played against them. But very similarly to that matchup last week, what I think is interesting here on the Boston College side is that they have not faced a running game that is as good as Virginia Tech's on this entire schedule.
Nope.
Like Florida State, Duquesne, Missouri, Michigan State, Western Kentucky, and Virginia. Virginia Tech's got a better rushing attack than all of those teams. Every single one of them.
Yep.
And I think this could be pretty similar to the Stanford game in that particular facet of the game, that particular matchup, where if Virginia Tech keeps plugging away,
Yeah, I mean, the Hokies
I think
were
they'll be
not,
okay.
they weren't overly efficient in the Stanford game. They ran for less than 4 yards a carry, but they continued to do it, and they continue to push the ball slowly, matriculate it downfield, convert third downs when you needed to, and Virginia Tech was able to score 30 plus points.
Yeah.
So you can follow that same formula for this kind of game. In a lot of ways, BC kind of represents what Stanford would be with Ashton Daniels at quarterback, although I think they're a little bit better just about everywhere around.
Yeah. I agree. I
Similar
think
style of opponent.
yes, and I think the one thing too is that Kyron Drones, when defenses creep up, he does hit explosive pass plays over the top. Like it sets up the entire offense for Virginia Tech when they're running the ball well. And that can be said about a lot of offenses, but Virginia Tech's passing game in particular really thrives off of all the run fake action that they do. You know, if they establish the run, Virginia Tech runs so many motions, so many different fakes off of running plays that they have previously run in the game that it really does feed into easy throws for Drones. And I think that, you know, if Virginia Tech just sticks with it to set up the passing game, they're going to be in a really good spot. I know it seems like a very elementary analysis, elementary breakdown, but if you've watched Virginia Tech's passing offense this year, some of the best games they've had were the last two, and that was when they were able to really just plug away in the running game, and everything sets up off of that. And there was a lot more of the rollout stuff that I had been screaming for before the Miami game. There's been a lot more of that, and a lot of that is because they've established the outside run in each of the last two games. How many times did they run that same stretch play against Miami to that same side of the field? They're running that stretch play off the left tackle a billion times against Miami. They just kept running it. They ran it over and over and over and over, and they did the same thing against Stanford and set up the passing game. So
play to your strengths. Don't let BC try to push you into a box that you don't want to be in.
Agree. And I think
take your shots, but stick to what you've been doing well.
What benefits Virginia Tech here is I think defensively they are in a spot where they can stop this Boston College rushing attack. It's not very good. They have a lot of guys they give the ball to, but like none of them have been overly impressive this year. So they give the ball to a lot of different guys. So if you're not stopping the run, that could wear on you, like you mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
But I think Virginia Tech can stop the run here. And I think if you do that, this is the best secondary the Castellanos has faced. And I think it puts Boston College in a bit of a predicament offensively. We'll get to the pick here in a few minutes. I think Virginia Tech's the better team here if they play like they did the last 2 weeks. I know they're the better team here if they play like they did the last 2 weeks. If they play kind of like they did against Rutgers, or they take a half off like they did against Old Dominion, or I mean, really, it was like a quarter off, but you take a quarter off like you did against Old Dominion, you take a half off like you did against Vanderbilt, you're going to be in hell in the fourth quarter on Thursday night. You're going to be in hell. So it's about Virginia Tech here. I think they got more talent. They've been playing good football last couple of weeks. Boston College, I think, is heading in another direction in terms of what we've seen the last 2 times out. I think these are 2 teams going in different directions, but that doesn't mean Virginia Tech can't screw around and have Boston College in this game. It's a 7-point spread for a reason.
Last thing I want to say about this game, Virginia Tech has not lived up to the hype and pomp and circumstance at home for quite some time. This game is really important for just in terms of getting yourself up the ACC standings and building momentum towards the second half of the season.
Yep.
But from a macro level, this is also a really important game because you're going to have all the eyes on you in terms of the college football world. You're going to have all eyes on you on Thursday night at home, a sold-out stadium where I'm sure Virginia Tech will have a lot of pregame festivities to keep the vibes going. You got to win this game. These are the kinds of wins that when you're trying to reshape the narrative around your football program that you're just another middling, mediocre team, you've got to win these games, especially when you're going to have the support that you have in Virginia Tech selling out yet another Thursday nighter, which is not common across the country.
Virginia Tech has sold out every home game this year, so shout out to the fans. Let's talk about the ACC picks. Joey, if you're still listening to this, don't hold me to any of these because we're going to record in a couple nights.
Why do we always do this? Why do you not
because
hold yourself to
the lines are going. Well, normally it's a bad excuse. I think tonight it's a good excuse because these lines are going to move.
The lines will change. That's
the lines will move. I mean, this is Sunday night. We're looking at this.
Games well ahead of schedule than what we normally do. So
I think I have a valid excuse this week. Normally I don't, and I just like to bitch and moan. Is usually that's my role here. People are like, "What do you do here?" That's what I do.
Being honest.
Yes, that's what I do. We have enough people listening to this podcast tonight that have been with us for a while that understand what my role here is. I host the round table and I bitch and moan. We're going to skip over the Virginia Tech BC game, pick it last like we usually do. Florida State's traveling to Duke Friday night.
Two weeknight games.
Oh. You know what's really funny? Okay, so Duke's a 3-point favorite. You know what's really funny about this is that Florida State keeps getting these like standalone or like halfway standalone games on national television just to like throw up all over themselves. It's really funny.
Just to keep losing.
Just keeps happening. I mean, there are other games going on Friday night, but this is like enough people will be watching this, so it'll be pretty funny. Yeah, I mean, give me Duke. I mean, I got to ride the horse until
I'm torn, and the only reason I'm torn, Mike, is just that Duke's got to lose again at some point. I don't know if it's going to be Friday night against Florida State at home. God, who would have thought that in a game where Manny Diaz was coaching, I would give Manny Diaz the coaching advantage. Give me the Noles.
Okay.
Give me Florida State to win this outright.
Yeah.
For no particular reason. I have no reason for it other than
that's fine.
Duke's got to lose it again at some point, and it might as well be this game.
Yeah. I could see my pick flipping on this one for sure later in the week. We'll see. Notre Dame, 3:30 ESPN, traveling to Georgia Tech. Oh, I skipped over like 3 or 4
Yeah.
Niners. That's
Noon,
okay.
Miami at Louisville. Come on, Mike.
Let's do that first.
Miami's a
Miami.
3.5 point fave.
Yeah, give me Miami.
Yes, I agree. Give me the Canes. I'm out on Louisville right now.
Me too.
I'm out.
Me too. You know what? Look, Louisville does this thing where they like screw around and do like really stupid stuff, very similar to what Miami does. The difference between these two teams is that Louisville does that and then they lose. Miami does it, and then Cam Ward just does Cam Ward things for the last 3 or 4 possessions.
Or they do it and the Zebras give them a win. Moving on. Noon, ACC Network, Virginia. Is this an early nomination for the Queen Elizabeth II you died? Joey, if you're listening, Virginia's 21.5 point dogs in Clemson.
Yeah.
Give
me the Tigers.
Torn on this one too.
Give me the Tigers.
You
know what gives me the warm and fuzzies about this? Anthony Calandria throwing into the Clemson secondary. That makes me feel really, really good. Give me Clemson.
Yeah. It would be pretty funny for Tony Elliott to bring his boys back to Clemson just to get absolutely walloped. Give me the Tigers to cover 21. That's a lot of points, but give me Clemson.
They keep covering 3-score spreads, so I think we just ride the horse until the horse dies.
That's probably the good way to do it.
Yeah.
If you watch this game, you need to go to rehab. Wake Forest.
Call the hotline.
Yeah, call the hotline. Wake Forest at UConn. UConn is a 2-point favorite.
Call the hotline. Give me
Jesus Christ.
Give me the Huskies. I mean, just 2 points at home. Just give me UConn.
I'm gonna ride with my boy Dave Clawson here. Give me the Deeks.
I really hope that this swings in Wake Forest direction just so I can bet on UConn as a home dog this week. I will not be calling the hotline. Notre Dame traveling to Georgia Tech. 3:30 ESPN. Irish are a 7.5 point favorite. I don't know here. I think Notre Dame wins, but Georgia Tech's at home, and they have enough offensive explosiveness to make it interesting.
Michael, this is
it's Atlanta, Mercedes. Yeah, I know. A lot of Notre Dame fans will be there.
Yeah. Oh man. I'm gonna take Notre Dame to cover.
Okay. I think at 7.5, I'm taking the Jackets. But I'll be keeping an eye on that one. They do just enough offensively.
Will you be partaking in this one, Mike?
Potentially. Okay. Yeah, this is if this thing gets under a touchdown, maybe I bet Notre Dame. Maybe I flip the pick to the other side. 7.5. Anything outside a touchdown, I think I might like Georgia Tech there.
If I find out you're partaking in the Wake UConn game, we're gonna have to have an intervention.
I only pick winners, you know.
Only.
That's why I'm still recording this podcast and not in Vegas.
3:30 ESPN network, ACC network. Jesus. NC State is at the Calgorithm. Mike, the Calgorithm is falling apart.
Oh my God! 10.5 point favorite.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah,
what?
That's a pretty wild line. NC State stinks. Cal,
so many points.
Cal stinks currently. I will take NC State.
That's so many points.
Yeah, it is.
Is Cal going to score 11 points in this game? Yeah, give me NC State. Cal's offense is horrible.
Remember, Michael, when you told us a few weeks ago that Cal
more than that, more than a few weeks ago, because I know what you're going to say. and I cannot be slandered like this. But I will own up to the fact that after the first couple of games in the season, I looked at Cal's schedule and I was like, you know
bought into
what?
the algorithm.
I said, you know what? There's a path.
Mike had his hammer and sickle flag ordered. He was ready to go.
I was cooking up some mean memes with my AI.
Yeah. Yes. Prime time, ACC Network, SMU at Stanford. SMU 15-point favorite on the road.
Why only 15? Why only 15?
I had the exact opposite thought. Give me Stanford with the points at home.
Why only 15?
Why not? Give me the Cardinal.
Yeah, I'm going to lean into that too because I don't like that line at all. Give me Stanford. SMU wins, but that's weird.
Yeah.
I'll keep an eye on that one too.
Finally, the game you've all been waiting for, 7:30 on Thursday. BC is in a sold-out Lane Stadium. Tech 7-point favorite opening line, Mike. As we record here Sunday night, 7-point faves are the Hokies. If I was a betting man, I'd be stupid to not bet on BC. So I'm going to take the Eagles with the points. I do think Virginia Tech is going to win this game. Mike's favorite stat will not get any better or not get any worse for him. Virginia Tech will get their second win in a one-score game under Brent Pry. 7 points seems like a lot. I think Virginia Tech can win this game by 2 scores, but the Hokies have just been too inconsistent thus far this season to be able to predict that. And if we're going to be going against the spread, I'd have to think that this is going to be a pretty close game from start to finish. So I'll take BC with the points. Virginia Tech will win. We'll go with a score of 31-27.
That would go over. That would go over by about a touchdown. Okay. I disagree with you because I think Virginia Tech's going to win this game by a couple scores. Now, what I will say is that there is some uncertainty if you are betting this game. The uncertainty is how these two teams look coming off of a bye. How they look kind of playing. It's not a full bye either. I mean, you do get the bye week, but you don't get the full bye, right? It's like 10 days off because you're playing on Thursday night. There's an element to this on the Boston College side where you have to go into Blacksburg on a Thursday, and that's not a good time, generally speaking. That's a tough place to go play. Lane's a tough place to go play anyway, but going there on a Thursday night, it's a little bit different. That's tough. From a matchup standpoint, I really like Virginia Tech's matchups in this game a lot. I like their defense against Boston College's rushing attack. I like the idea of Castellanos throwing against Virginia Tech secondary. I like Virginia Tech's matchups in the passing game against Boston College's secondary, even though the defense has been pretty decent this year for BC. I think the rushing defense is good for Boston College for sure, but I think also this is the best rushing attack they've faced. Virginia Tech's rounding into form, but to your point, there's a lot of inconsistency in terms of like week over week output, right? Like how this team has looked. So from a betting standpoint, there's a little bit of, I mean, this is a stay away for me as a bettor, as your dog makes an appearance.
He was trying to jump on the chair, so figured I'd let him come say hi.
I think it's fair for him to enter the fray, especially since you just picked an underdog.
Yes.
So there we go. But yeah, give me the Hokies by a couple scores. I think they win this game by like 10-12. I don't think this is a blowout by any stretch. I think Virginia Tech will win this game though, and I think they move to 4-3. They need to have it. Got to have it.
Yeah, this is probably as close to a must-win as there is for sure.
Yeah. So I'm feeling okay about this.
Yeah, he agrees.
Must win.
Beautiful. He's pretty tired.
He looks that way.
Yeah.
He's zonked out. Looks like he's looking like how I will be in the middle of my ACC podcast recording here in a few minutes with Joey. So
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
Rate, review, subscribe. Make sure you're following or subscribing on whatever app you're using to listen. Thanks, buddy. Make sure you're hitting the bell when you subscribe on YouTube so you get notified when we go live. Same thing on X. Go ahead and turn on the notifications so you don't miss when we go live. Not sure when we're going to record the recap for Thursday. We'll have to talk about that. But we'll see you guys in a little bit.
Yep, we will. Yeah, rate, review, subscribe, please. We haven't gotten a lot of reviews on Apple in particular in a while. So if somebody wants to go cook up some of those, that'd be good. Let us know how we're doing.
Yeah, tell us who your favorite co-host on the pod is and why. How about that?
Yeah, Ricky's gotten his fair share of interesting reviews in the past.
Yeah,
see if that continues.
2018 through 2021. That was an uncomfortable time for us, for sure.
It was scary hours on the podcast. We'll be back. We'll be back at some point to recap. We'll give you guys a heads up when we're back to recap. Until then, enjoy the game Thursday night. Go Hokies.